we've done the polling on this over and over and over again. If you poll in the most favorable manner, they support it. If you poll for what it actually is, that support plummets to like 25%.
That's not remotely true.
It is absolutely true. I don't remember if it was
You're
Kate
arguing
poll or
against Democratic policies. It's amazing. Why don't you just join the Republican Party?
we're
So
not
let me
arguing
just
about whether or
interject
not
one
the
thing
policy
here.
is good or bad. Well,
If I
hold
can
on,
interject one thing.
Cenk Uygur completely annihilates Destiny here in this clip on the David Pakman show. As you can see here, things do get a bit unhinged, and David Pakman has to come in and sort of interject and try to keep things a bit civil. Throughout this clip, you're going to see Cenk Uygur and Destiny go head-to-head and debate on a number of topics, while David Pakman is on the side just sort of moderating and trying to keep things a bit civil. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
From what I've seen, the polling Cenk mentions does exist, around 70-75% support. The polling I've seen with what we might call more specific wording, it's not that support drops to 25%, but I have seen it drop to more like 48 to 50%. I do think a lot of it's complicated because if you just ask someone, does the government have a basic level of responsibility to give people some health care? Most people say yes, and also a lot of them don't necessarily know what that means. I don't know that we're going to solve whether it's a good policy based on 3 different polls that ask it in a different way. I don't know. I've seen the polling.
Well, no, yeah, I understand. I'm just saying that, like, if you want to if you want to actually pass any policy or do anything, you have to have an actual realistic understanding of what it is Americans even think before you even begin to go down the path of how do we implement it. And the reality is single payer healthcare. When you ask somebody, do you think the government should provide health insurance for people? That polls incredibly well.
Yes.
When you ask, should the government be the second question, there were all 3 of these were listed in a. I wish I could remember the name of the polling firm, but this is around when
I
Bernie
think
was
it's
running.
the Kaiser Family Foundation that
it might be that. There's a second way of asking it that's more neutral. Of like, do you think that the government should be do you think that the government should be able to offer insurance or something for all levels? Something like that. But then the third question is, should the government be the sole provider of insurance and ban private insurance? And that one is incredibly unpopular. I think that's
well,
the one
the
that
ban
polls
private insurance. It's like even countries that have universal systems, they don't ban. Most of them don't ban private insurance. So I don't even know why that would be included necessarily.
Because that's what Bernie's plan was. Bernie's plan for healthcare was the furthest left plan of any country that would have ever existed on the face of the earth. There is no other plan.
Not true, and B, you really sound like a Republican.
That's great, but I actually read the policy, okay? So Bernie Sanders' plan included things like no copay for drugs and covered things like vision and dental and provided for a single means of both insurance and I believe delivery medicine throughout the entire country. It was more left than any other medical plan on the planet. I do agree with what you're saying, Pakman, that there are multi-payer systems. I'm a big fan of either a public option or even a single payer system, depending on how you administer it. I think it's fine. Medicare expansion, all things are fine. But you have to be honest about like where is the electorate at? How do they feel about these things? And you can't just constantly blame donors and billionaires and even like this huge cope of calling Trump a fake populist. Trump is as populist as they come. He is one man against the system who's telling you that he's going to fight and take it all down as one person against all the corrupt donors and everything else. This is as populist as they possibly come. Populists become dictators. This is what populism is. It's the precursor to things like fascism or authoritarian regimes. You always get these like strong, brave men.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. Do things that are unpopular.
I mean, he's winning elections on it, so yeah. And then
yeah, go ahead, Destiny.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you ruined my train of thought. Go ahead.
Sorry.
The last thing I wanted to ask
about. Pakman ruined my train of thought.
The last thing I wanted to ask about involves sort of both of you on Twitter. Cenk, you kind of went mega viral for responding to Elon Musk and saying, hey, put me in charge of slashing that Pentagon budget. Elon actually replied. He asked for suggestions. Don Jr. replied something like, this is being considered or it was considered. Destiny, you responded to the entire thing by saying sigh, S-I-G-H. I think my first question to you, Cenk, is, do you think they genuinely want to cut defense spending, or this entire Department of Grifty Edgelords thing is just really about cutting social programs at the end of the day? Or do you really think the Pentagon is something they would cut?
I think just like backtracking real quick, back when like Destiny was talking about how Bernie's healthcare plan was too far left. Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree on that point because, you know, I think in the beginning when Bernie first started running for president, Trump was going up against Hillary. I think a lot of people they liked Bernie as a person. Like, you know, he seemed like a very nice, genuine person. But then when he begins to talk about just like the different policies that he believes in, it just seemed too far left. And I think that's kind of why Bernie lost his popularity, because his policies are kind of, you know, going into like socialism and things like that. And Cenk Uygur, who is clearly far right, he agrees on this point as well. And I think that, David Pakman does a good job, with follow-up questions and just sort of asking both of these guys.
So let's look at this conversation, right? So um, first of all, why do I call Trump a fake populist? Because he goes rah rah average man, which I think is smart political strategy, because he's focusing on things that are popular. That's what populism is. Wow, that's rocket science to figure that out is to the correct electoral strategy. But then when he gets into office, what's his number one priority? Corporate tax cuts and delivering for his donors like Miriam Adelson. He put in Marco Rubio, Elise Stefanik, Mike Waltz, Mike Huckabee, all Team Miriam, neocon war hawks. So what happened? I thought you were anti-war. And part of what I'm doing here is some of the right-wing populists actually do agree with us on some issues. So, for example, anti-corruption. When I point out that Miriam Adelson gave Trump $137 million and then he gave her four appointees, people even on the right wing go, yeah, that sucks, and that we don't agree with Trump there, and that's a stunning turn of events. I've never seen that happen before, but it's actually genuinely happening online, and you should give them some credit for that. Now, on cutting, what I'm asking is, do you guys really mean it? And so, if you really mean it, most of the corruption is in the Pentagon. So that's where all the pork goes, because if you question that pork, they go, you're endangering our national security. You're putting all of our lives on the line, etc. So they stuff it full of pork. So I said, look, guys, if you're going to do cuts, let's start at the Pentagon. I can cut $400 billion overnight for you. And what it's doing is putting them to the test. Do you really mean it or don't you? And so a couple of surprising things happen from there. First of all, if you look at my comment section, right-wing populists actually do mean it. So this is going to be really, really interesting. So then Elon and Don Jr. say, yeah, we mean it too. And they follow through on at least one of the proposals that I mentioned, which was, hey, a lot of these contracts go to these defense contractors because the generals, after they retire, go to work for those defense contractors, and that gives them an incentive to sell us out and to buy all these bloated programs because they're literally going to get paid by those same companies. And if they say, yes, you're right, which is where they are today, and we should stop that, so that conflict of interest, well, that's a left-wing position that we've been arguing for 20 years. I'll take it. That's fantastic. And that's the unity that mainstream media pretended that they were in favor of, but only when they were doing corporate deals for tax cuts for the rich, etc. Now we have some potential actual unity. At the same time, I'm not a sucker. I've been in this game a long time. So is it possible that they don't cut the Pentagon and instead they cut social spending? Of course, that's more likely, right? But at least the very first conversation we're having online about what to cut is the Pentagon. Perfect. You can't ask for anything better from the left wing populist way of looking at it.
So, I mean, yeah, it kind of just seems like there's like this general conversation going on right now with Trump being a populist and just trying to appeal to like the mass population for more popularity. And, you know, although I do agree with that, I also just think that like every like politician is sort of like a populist in a way, because in order to get votes from, the general public, you got to appeal to everyone. You got to like, talk about the things that, they want changed and things that they want fixed. And if you don't talk about those things, like they're just not going to vote for you. So saying like how Trump is a populist, yeah, that might be true, but you know, I think every politician is a populist if you really think about it. Um, in this clip, like Destiny just kept talking about how, Trump is a populist and he's not actually going to do the things that he says. And, Cenk agrees that, Trump is a populist, but, I think every politician is a populist in some way.
So Destiny, tell us about the reason for the sigh. Is it that you think Cenk's being naive, that they're not really going to cut, or that he's barking up the wrong tree here?
I don't think they plan on cutting. I don't even like the conversation. I feel like there's so many issues I have with this. When progressives and really with anybody talks about taxes or anybody talks about budgets, like the conversation, people always talk about like taxes like they're either this like tool of punishment or self-flagellation, or it's like this noble way of I think that we should figure out what are the government programs that we want to fund and why. Okay. So do we want single payer healthcare? Do we want expansion of Medicare? Do we want to do SNAP and WIC and benefits programs? Do we want to have tax subsidies for electric cars and solar? Like we figure these things out. Once we figure that out, we have our liabilities. Okay. This is how much we owe. And then we need to figure out how do we raise the money for it. Okay. Do we tax people? Do we tariff? Do we whatever? Like how does the government fund these programs? That should be the totality of the conversation about taxes. These arbitrary obsessions with like, we got to slash the Pentagon by X dollars. We have to slash the military. Like, why? What do we, what do you want to cut? Like, let's talk about that. Do we like, was the F-35 program a mistake? Do we want to have, like no military presence around the world? Do we shut down all of our bases? Do we want to have no more funding towards any type of participation? Like, what do we actually want to cut? Because the random thing, like imagine, and it's so crazy to me too, especially because like Cenk is a business owner and all these other guys are business owners. You walk in, you ask, okay, I come into your business and you want to cut things. Like, is it just, I'm going to cut 40% of my budget. Did you just fire randomly like 40% of your employees? Or like, no, well, you look at departments maybe that aren't making money. You look at parts of your business maybe you don't need, but it's never just like randomly like, okay, we're going to cut half our thing today, unless you've got like a loan that's being called in and you have to pay up or something. So I mean, like that's one part of it. The second part of it is it's okay. So to be fully transparent, I'm unhinged now when it comes to dealing with conservatives, because I'm more concerned about turning out base than ever appealing to these insane people. There is no principled foundation to what conservatives believe regarding anything having to do with foreign policy or the military. The exact same people who will say there were no wars under Trump will ignore the fact that he hid how much more we were drone striking people in Yemen. People will say there were no more wars under Trump, and they'll ignore the fact that we allowed, the allies that we had in Syria to die. We'll say no more wars under Trump. We'll ignore the fact that Iran attacked Saudi Arabia, that the United States bombed a Syrian airport, that Assad was chemically gassing his people still, that border riots were raging on in the Gaza Strip. Like, it's just, it's ridiculous. So for the first time ever, Russian troops were engaging with Ukrainian troops directly in the Donbass, I think in 2018. This idea that like Trump has some allegiance to some foreign policy position where it's like, oh, we're going to cut military spending is absolutely not true.
Well, even more so then, I mean, if that's true and they'll consider cutting something because Cenk's bringing it up, isn't that a reason for him to be involved rather than saying, this is a waste of time? I don't know.
I mean, I just hope that people are aware of what I just need people to be aware of like what's going on. Like if you get like oh well, they managed to cut $50 million from the military budget and that money was like all earmarked for the VA or something, like that's not a good thing. Right? Like we want we want something. I wish that people just spoke in policies more rather than like, we need to tax billionaires because we hate them, or like we need to give tax cuts to billionaires because they save us, or we need to do that. It's like, what are the policies that we want to support? What do we want to cut from the military? What do we like? That's, I think, the more important conversations.
I mean, yeah, I think Destiny brings up a good point here about talking in terms of budget cuts and policies rather than just like emotional opinions. Like, at the end of the day, like it's important that all of us are a bit more civil when it comes to talking about politics and, coming to a conclusion like topics and just different ways that we can fix the country, as opposed to just kind of going at each other because we have opposing views. Like here in this clip that we just watched, Cenk Uygur and Destiny, Destiny being more of a left wing, whereas Cenk Uygur is a bit more of a right. Even though they had like opposing viewpoints, I still think that like they had a pretty civil conversation at the end of the day. And that's kind of what it comes down to, is that like, in order for things to like move forward, we got to make sure that we, have these civil conversations and talk about different policies and different like economic changes that are going on in a more civil manner. And I think, David Pakman did a good job here moderating the whole debate. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, thanks again, guys, for watching. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. And let me know below what you guys think about, these topics that were discussed in this video.